Hello and welcome to Trade Finance Talks TV. My name is Alex Gray, Head of Trade and Transaction Banking at the London Institute of Banking and Finance, and we have taken it over today. I am joined today by Noémi Klein, formerly Regional Head of Financial Crime Surveillance Operations at Standard Chartered Bank, and now you're on a career break, aren't you?
Yes, first time ever, new job.
Oh, cool. Now, we could have spent the whole time just talking about your career because it is fascinating. I'm going to go through it in like 30 seconds. Graduated in law in Romania, yep. And then Citibank, KYC analyst, and then very quickly became a senior analyst, then MoneyGram, transaction monitoring analyst, PwC, remediation projects, and then with the Standard Chartered Bank. Obviously a very big trade bank. And that's why we've got you along today, because you're one of our speakers at our annual Trade Finance Compliance Conference just a couple of weeks ago in London. It was great to be back in the room with everybody, and we just thought we'd just talk about some of the themes of that in a quick few minutes. So one of the things I think we were talking about earlier was about collaboration. Was that kind of the overarching theme, do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think collaboration was really an overarching theme throughout the conference. It was very interesting to see how different professionals come together from various parts of the industry and share their observations, which can be, of course, unique, or they can be thematic, right? But collaboration was one thing that everybody said should be improved. And I think when we look at it and we want to break this down maybe into more digestible parts, one is definitely within an organization. When we heard our speakers talking about running, for example, compliance reviews or even compliance transformation programs, one thing that they said they've noticed is that there are too many siloed teams within the world of fighting financial crime. And this does not only cover trade, it goes way beyond that. And it also covers monitoring, KYC, sanctions, and what our experts were saying, what they observed was that these teams do not share enough knowledge. And whenever they look at a customer's behavior or a case or like customer's profile, they look at it from a fairly isolated perspective. So for example, when it comes to trade, when analyzing trade transactions or looking at trade documentation, they wouldn't necessarily take into account what's on the KYC profile of the certain client or even the customer of the customer, which is obviously crucial to understand the entire relationship, because clients are our common denominators of the risk that any institution is taking. So I think one of the takeaways was that the historic silos need to be broken down for institutions to have a better risk assessment and risk management of things.
So one of the takeaways that I think people remember from the event, because you remember the whole overall themes, you remember so-and-so was a good speaker, but they will actually remember one of the war stories you told, which I'm afraid we'll have to share with everybody because it is a brilliant one. We have mentioned no names of which institution it was, but there's something about a number of passports, because this is a great story. Would you mind sharing it?
Yes, of course. So in one of my former roles, I've been conducting compliance reviews in various regions, some more exciting and some less. So this was definitely one of the more exciting regions where we've noticed unusual transactions, and we went in to do a compliance review in the branch itself. And of course you need to know how you conduct yourself, and maybe also show that you're a little bit more naive to things. And we asked about this particular customer that we've noticed the unusual transactions coming from, and our branch manager lady kindly told us that this has been a client that they've known for a very long time. The client comes in every day and he deposits money and sends money to individuals or even organizations that he's been sending to for a very long time, and they even have his passports to facilitate the transactions. So
because passports plural.
Passports plural. There were 4 passports for the same customer that were basically pulled out from under the counter.
Yeah, so there's a few red flags there, and I mean that was one of those ones in the compliance world at a conference, but that actually got a laugh, which we don't get many laughs at conferences like that. So that was, people will remember that story. So talking about the collaboration, sharing war stories, we talked about just people. At the conference, there was a lot of times where we were talking about a problem that had happened. A lot of the problems are not new. They keep on happening. Case studies of different things, but it matches the case of a few years ago. It seems as if people are not learning, partly I think because things are not being shared. There was a lot of talk about sharing, obviously technology, data sharing, but even just verbally with these kind of conferences, a lot of that kind of talk, wasn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So I think the second dimension of sharing is obviously between institutions, and probably institutions have been indirectly discouraged from sharing that information because of secrecy laws and data privacy laws, and just thinking about the legal repercussions that they could suffer due to breaching those. So this was also a recurring topic during the conference, and I think this also goes beyond financial institutions. It goes to service providers, asset managers, legal firms, auditors, that all these service providers should be able to share information among them, because the bad actors are not going to use one institution and one account and one service, but they're going to use multiple ones.
I remember one of the bankers was saying about, actually at his organization, they celebrate people in the team who have actually found red flags and followed up. They found frauds, and I thought that was a very good thing to celebrate, because it tends to happen is that if you're working, there's an element of fear that if you don't find something, you get slapped on the wrist. So what I liked about this bank was talk about celebrating when people actually find things. I also commented, having worked in these areas, that people, especially the trade ops area, they just say, oh, I was just doing my job. They don't like to be celebrated in some ways. They like to keep the head down. But I did like that, to just highlighting when people are doing well. I think it relieves the stress in the environment.
Yeah, I think sometimes people diminish their role in identifying emerging risks, which are obviously key for an organization to learn about trends and grow and build their controls that can save them from breaching laws or regulations or doing something wrong unknowingly.
And that's why even like, with the work that Trade Finance Global do and sharing information about things, and we do that at LIBF, the more that can be shared, the better. So in terms of, of course, we wouldn't have a conference on trade finance compliance without talking about, the elephant, it's probably the big bear in the room, Russia. And that of course came up, didn't it? And you have a bit of experience being not from Romania, of course, but you have an expertise in that kind of region. So what were some of the themes you found regarding the Russian sanctions? Because it's changed the playing field over the past year and a half, really, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So definitely the sanctions that were devised due to the Ukraine-Russia conflict were a centerpiece of the conference. Interestingly, what the professionals from the industry shared was that the methods didn't change, and this just comes back to the point that you just made, that we never learn, and that the compliance memory is a very short one. But what is interesting and different about it is that these sanctions surround entities that are very deeply interconnected in the globalized economy, and this is what makes enforcing them so difficult. And as you said, like, the experience in the region is, especially in the CIS region, there are many countries surrounding Russia that rely heavily on the exports and imports with them, and these economies are being crippled by the sanctions, and this is something that sometimes we do not necessarily acknowledge, and what kind of impact does it have?
Because some of the countries, it happened with Iran and near Venezuela, the countries bordering, suddenly their trade figures increase, and it's like, oh, that's amazing, they've done really well, but essentially it's the goods going into that country, and then they'll work our way out. So that happens with the UAE and Iran, for example, and other countries bordering Iran. But it's been happening in Russia as well, hasn't it? The Russian trade figures have dropped, but all these other countries, the figures have gone up, haven't they?
Yes, exactly. So when we look at, for example, the EU's export numbers, like from 2021 in comparison to 2022, we see a 38% decrease in the overall EU exports. But when we look at the 10 countries surrounding Russia, multi-CIS countries, I'm not counting China because that's a little bit different, we see a 47% increase to those countries. And of course we cannot presume that all of that goes in and out of Russia, but some of it must. And of course, the geopolitical states that certain countries took towards the sanctions does make enforcing them much harder. We know that China or India or the UAE do not necessarily support the implementation of these sanctions. And even when we look, for example, at one of the most recent industries that the EU and the UK and the US is trying to crack down on, which is the diamond industry in Russia, we can see that the amount of Russian diamond money in the UAE is sevenfolded over just the last month.
And that is ironic. We'll look to close. We were talking about diamonds, and as you know, my mother's a jeweler, and I know a bit about diamonds. And we're actually sat in the Trade Finance Global's office in Hatton Garden, and there's a lot of diamond dealers out there. So we've actually been talking. That kind of works really well, full circle, in sort of coming to a close. Noémi, thanks very much for joining us, and thank you, Trade Finance Global.
Thank you, Alex.